Welcome to Moon's Fairy Tales. Today, we soar into the heart of Aegon's conquest with what if Visenya Targaryen's ambition, not Aegon's, shaped the fate of Westeros? Join us as we follow Visenya's ruthless path through war and fire, where kingdoms fall, dragons burn the skies, and the thirst for power knows no bounds. Sit back, relax, and let the flames of Visenya's conquest consume you. Chapter 1: The Scars of Ambition. The sky was dark, painted with clouds that blotted out the stars. Beneath, the land stretched like a forgotten wasteland, scattered with the remnants of the banners that once held the sigils of great houses. I looked down from atop Vhagar, my fingers wrapped tight around the reins, feeling the cold steel of my gauntlets bite into my skin. The winds of Westeros whispered of conquest, of blood yet to be spilled, but I heard only silence. For years, Aegon had spoken of uniting the realm. He, the dreamer, the conqueror. But this was not his dream alone. No. This was our destiny. The Targaryens were meant to sit the Iron Throne, to burn the weaknesses of men, to forge a new world in fire and blood. I was born for this. Yet, even as the flames consumed all in our path, the scars of ambition marked my soul, deeper than any sword. The first banners to fall were those of House Durrandon. Orys Baratheon had handled the siege, but I had led the charge, my blade dark sister cutting through the air like a shadow of death. I did not flinch. I did not hesitate. Mercy was not a luxury granted to those who stood against the will of Aegon. And it was my will too. We would not stop until all of Westeros knelt. Whether they did so in submission or in death was of no concern to me. I could still hear the crack of bones breaking beneath the might of Vhagar's jaws, her roar thundering through the sky as she set the castle ablaze. Flames licking the walls. Screams carried on the wind. They deserved it. Every single one of them. For standing against us, for thinking they could defy the might of the dragons. It was here, on the battlefield, that I felt truly alive. And yet, as the fires died and the ash settled, a coldness crept into my chest. I would not let it show. Not to Aegon. Not to anyone. But the truth was there, a shadow lingering in my thoughts. The path we walked was one drenched in blood, and I wondered, just for a moment, if we were becoming something less than human. Something darker. I turned my gaze to the horizon. Beyond the smoke, far past the charred remains of Durrandon's keep, the Reach awaited. Their lords, their armies, their fields of gold. They would burn too. They all would. Fire was inevitable. It was what we brought with us. Aegon was right, I whispered to myself, though my words vanished into the wind. This world belongs to us. But deep down, I could not shake the feeling that the world was also taking something from me. With every victory, every castle turned to rubble, a part of me became more distant. Detached. The girl I once was had vanished long ago, replaced by something fiercer. Colder. The days when I fought alongside my brothers with laughter in my heart felt like a dream now. What was left was duty, purpose, and the insatiable hunger for more. I steeled myself. Weakness had no place here. I was Visenya Targaryen, rider of Vhagar, sister to the conqueror, And it was by my hand that Westeros would fall. Not through Aegon's diplomacy or Rhaenys' soft words, but by fire, by steel, by my unwavering resolve. My thoughts drifted back to the battlefield, the clash of steel, the cries of men as they fell beneath my blade. I remembered their eyes, wide with terror as they realized they stood no chance against a dragon rider. They begged for mercy. But mercy, I had learned, was not something we could afford. Not in a world that sought to tear us down the moment we showed even the slightest sign of compassion. It was weakness, and weakness was death. The Targaryens were not made for weakness. We were fire-blooded, forged in the flames of old Valyria. I could still hear my mother's voice, a faint memory that often visited me in the quiet moments after battle. You will need to be strong, Visenya. Stronger than your brothers. Stronger than any lord or king you meet. The world will not grant you mercy, so do not grant it in return. And I hadn't. Not once. As the wind blew colder, I glanced over at my sword, dark sister, its edge gleaming in the faint light of the moon. A tool of death, as much a part of me as the blood in my veins. I could almost hear it hum, craving more blood, more battle. It would not have to wait long. The Reach will fall, I murmured to the night. They are fools to think otherwise. But there was something else. Something that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I could sense it, like the tension in the air before a storm. The lords of the Reach were clever, their armies vast. They would not fall easily. Perhaps, deep down, that was what I craved, a true challenge. A battle that would test my limits. To feel the thrill of danger again. Vhagar stirred beneath me, her great wings shifting with a rumble that shook the ground. She could sense it too, the call of battle, the promise of blood to come. A smile crept to my lips. My dragon and I were of one mind. We craved the same thing, conquest. And if the lords of the Reach thought their golden fields would protect them, they were mistaken. I could already see it in my mind, Vhagar's fire tearing through their crops, their castles crumbling beneath her wrath. And I, high above them, watching as their world turned to ash. Let them resist, I whispered, my voice full of quiet malice. It will only make their fall all the sweeter. I turned my eyes back to the sky, to the dark clouds that mirrored the storm within me. There was no turning back now. The path we had chosen was clear, and it led only to more death, more destruction. But it was the path we were born to walk. And I would walk it without hesitation. For the scars of ambition were carved deep within me, and the flames of conquest burned ever brighter in my heart. There was no room for doubt. No room for fear. Only fire. The next conquest awaited, and I would meet it with open arms. Chapter 2: The Storm of Blood. The winds held across the battlements of Storm's End, tearing at the banners of House Baratheon. The stag upon their sigil fluttered defiantly, but even from my vantage on Vhagar, high above the storm-racked shores, I could see the fear in their eyes. The men below had heard our coming. They knew who was descending upon them. They knew that I, Visenya Targaryen, sister to Aegon the Conqueror, brought fire and blood. The Stormlands had been resistant, their defiance a thorn in the flesh of our campaign. Orys Baratheon, Aegon's closest friend and rumored bastard brother, had tried to reason with them. Foolish, pitiful. Diplomacy had no place in war. If they would not bend the knee willingly, they would do so through fire. I would make sure of it. The sky churned with the anger of a brewing storm, but the true tempest was about to begin below. I looked down at the walls of Storm's End, their stone defenses standing resolute, a monument to generations of Baratheon pride. They thought their walls would save them. They were wrong. Vhagar rumbled beneath me, sensing my thoughts, her massive body shifting in anticipation. Her scales, dark as night, blended with the clouds above, a shadow of death circling the castle below. The men in the courtyard scrambled, shouting orders, tightening their defenses. Fools! No amount of preparation could save them from the fury I was about to unleash. I gave the command, a simple tug of the reins, and Vhagar surged forward, her wings cutting through the air with terrifying grace. The clouds parted as she dove, the roar of her descent louder than the thunder that cracked across the sky. The men below saw her too late. Their cries of panic echoed up to me, and I felt the thrill of power rise within my chest. This was what it meant to be Targaryen. To wield the might of dragons, to hold the very forces of nature in your grasp. I was no mere mortal. I was a queen, a conqueror, the embodiment of fire and blood. Burn them, I whispered into the wind, and Vhagar obeyed. The flames erupted from her jaws, a torrent of blazing fury that engulfed the courtyard below. Stone cracked under the heat, the very walls that had withstood centuries of siege crumbled beneath Vhagar's wrath. The men screamed, their bodies consumed by the flames, their armor melting into their flesh. There was no escape. Not from me. Not from the storm I commanded. I watched as the fire spread, licking the towers, devouring everything in its path. This was what defiance brought them. The Baratheons thought their storm could rival that of a dragon's fire, but they had forgotten their place. They had forgotten that we were the rulers of the skies, not the storm. A sharp pain tore through my thoughts, an old wound, one I had never spoken of. The voice of my mother echoed in the recesses of my mind. Remember who you are, Visenya. You are not merely a queen. You are a force. You are above these men. Above their lives. Above their deaths. I let those words guide me, cold and unyielding, as Vhagar circled above the destruction. The courtyard was now an inferno, the flames casting flickering shadows on the blackened stone. The heat rose to meet me even in the sky, a searing reminder of the consequences for those who defied the Targaryens. But amidst the flames, I saw movement. Survivors. A group of soldiers had taken refuge beneath a collapsed tower. Their leader, a man clad in the black and gold armor of House Baratheon, stood with his sword drawn, defiant even as the world burned around him. My eyes narrowed. Was this the best they could offer? Was this the great defense of the Stormlands? I guided Vhagar lower, her massive form casting a shadow over the remaining soldiers. They looked up, terror etched into their faces, their swords trembling in their hands. The Baratheon lord, however, did not waver. He stood tall, glaring at me as if he could challenge the very heavens. I admired his courage, foolish though it was. Come to face your death with honor? I called down to him, my voice cold, emotionless. Or do you think your sword can strike down a dragon? He said nothing, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with defiance. Such pride. It was always the same with these Westerosi lords. They clung to their honor, their banners, as if it could shield them from the inevitable. As if it could save them from the wrath of House Targaryen. It doesn't have to be this way, I continued, though I knew the words were hollow. Mercy was not something I gave freely. But there was something in me that wanted to see him beg. To see him realize the futility of his resistance. The Baratheon lord spat onto the ground, the defiance still burning in his eyes. I'd rather die than bow to a foreign queen, he growled. We do not kneel in the Stormlands. My blood boiled at his words. Foreign queen? I was not foreign. I was Targaryen. This land was ours by right, by fire and blood, and I would make him understand. Then die, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I did not need to command Vhagar. She felt my anger, my desire for his destruction. With a roar that shook the very earth, she unleashed her fire once more. The flames consumed the Baratheon lord and his men, their screams rising into the air like a twisted melody. Their pride, their resistance, all of it turned to ash. As the fire raged, I felt a strange emptiness settle within me. The victory was ours. Storm's end had fallen. The Baratheons had been broken. And yet, there was no satisfaction in it. No glory. Only the cold reminder that this war was far from over. The next battle awaited, and after that, another. Endless bloodshed. But I could not let that thought take hold. Not now. I had no room for weakness. I was Visenya Targaryen, and my destiny was clear. The Stormlands were but one piece of the greater puzzle, and we would not stop until all of Westeros lay at our feet. I turned Vhagar toward the horizon, where the clouds parted, revealing the expanse of the reach beyond. Rich, fertile lands, full of life and plenty. It would burn just as the Stormlands had. I would make sure of it. But as we flew, the weight of what we had done lingered. These men had not stood a chance. They had fought for their home, their honor, but it had meant nothing in the face of dragon fire. Part of me wondered if this was the fate of all who opposed us, to be crushed, forgotten in the wake of our conquest. And if that was true, what did it say of us? Aegon had spoken of peace through conquest, of a united Westeros under Targaryen rule. But the path we walked was paved with bodies, with ash and ruin. I had always believed in our cause, in our right to rule. But as I watched the smoke rise from the ruins of Storm's End, I wondered, just for a moment, if we were becoming the very monsters we had sought to conquer. I shook the thought from my mind. It did not matter. We were Targaryens. We were born of fire, and the world would bow to us, or it would burn. There was no middle ground. No compromise. No mercy. The storm had passed, but the blood had only just begun to spill. Chapter 3: Flames over the Reach. The Reach was unlike the Stormlands. Where the lands of the Baratheons were rugged and harsh, battered by wind and sea, the Reach was a paradise. Lush, fertile fields stretched as far as the eye could see, ripening under the warm sun, golden wheat swaying gently in the breeze. But that beauty was a mask. Beneath it lay defiance, as strong and proud as any lord who had refused to bend the knee. I stood atop Vhagar, the sky above us clear, the air heavy with expectation. Below, the forces of House Gardner had gathered, their armies vast and well supplied, their banners flying high. They thought their numbers could stop us. They thought their wealth, their food, their land could protect them from the flames. But nothing could stand against the fire of a dragon. "They'll burn just like a rest," I whispered, my voice low, meant for Vhagar and no one else. Vhagar rumbled in response, her massive wings twitching as if she, too, was eager to taste the destruction to come. I could feel the bond between us deepening with every battle, every shared moment of victory. She was no mere beast, she was an extension of my will, the very embodiment of Targaryen wrath. From my vantage in the sky, I could see the entire battlefield. The Gardner forces had taken up defensive positions across their fields, using their knowledge of the land to their advantage. Clever, but futile. They might have numbers, but I had something far more devastating. The fields of the Reach, so full of life, would soon be nothing but ash. I raised Dark Sister, the sword gleaming in the sun. At my signal, Vhagar surged forward, her wings beating powerfully as we soared above the enemy ranks. I could see the panic spreading below, soldiers pointing up at us, shouting orders that would not save them. They had seen dragons before, but none like Vhagar. None like me. My gaze focused on the heart of the Gardner army, where their lords and commanders had gathered, clustered under their banners. They had positioned themselves at the rear, thinking their distance from the front lines would keep them safe. They were wrong. "Burn them all," I commanded. Vhagar responded instantly, releasing a torrent of flame from her jaws that tore through the air like a roaring beast. The fire swept across the golden fields, devouring everything in its path. Crops that had fed generations of men, that had sustained the wealth and power of the Reach, were reduced to smoldering ruins in mere moments. The soldiers below screamed, scrambling to escape the inferno, but there was no escape. The fire spread faster than they could run, engulfing them, their armor glowing red-hot before it melted into their flesh. I watched, emotionless, as their bodies crumpled into the flames. This was their fate. This was the price of defiance. I guided Vhagar in a wide arc, turning her back toward the main host of the Gardner forces. Their commanders had realized the danger too late. The flames were already upon them. I saw one of the lords, an older man, likely the head of House Gardner, shouting orders, his voice hoarse with desperation. He was trying to rally his men, trying to mount some last, pitiful defense against the inevitable. I felt a momentary flicker of respect. He was brave, at least. Foolish, but brave. But bravery meant nothing to me. With another sharp pull of the reins, Vhagar descended, her claws tearing through the earth as she landed in the center of the Gardner host. The ground shook with the impact, and the men scattered like frightened animals, their courage evaporating in the face of a dragon's might. I could feel Vhagar's hunger for destruction, her desire to burn them all to cinders. I dismounted, Dark Sister in hand, and stepped onto the battlefield. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid scent of burning flesh and charred crops hanging heavy in my nostrils. Around me, the survivors of the initial attack hesitated, unsure whether to flee or fight. Let them choose, I thought. It would make no difference. A group of soldiers rushed toward me, their swords drawn, their faces twisted with fear and fury. I met them without hesitation, Dark Sister slicing through the air with lethal precision. The first man fell before he even had a chance to raise his shield. The second swung wildly at me, his desperation making him clumsy. I parried his strike with ease, the force of my blow sending him staggering back. "Is this all you have?" I shouted, my voice echoing across the battlefield. "Is this your resistance?" They kept coming, but I cut them down one by one, their blood staining the earth at my feet. The soldiers of the Reach were strong, but they were not strong enough. Not against me. Not against Vhagar. As I fought, I felt the heat of the flames creeping closer, the fire Vhagar had unleashed spreading across the battlefield. I could hear the crackling of the burning crops, the roar of the inferno as it consumed everything in its path. The Reach, the heart of Westeros's prosperity, was being reduced to ash before my eyes. And I reveled in it. This was what it meant to be Targaryen. To wield power so great, so absolute, that entire kingdoms trembled at the mere sight of us. To bring fire and blood to those who dared oppose us. But even as the flames raged around me, I felt a strange emptiness growing within. The thrill of battle, of victory, was still there, but it was accompanied by a cold hollowness. I had won, again. I had brought the Reach to its knees, just as I had the Stormlands, just as I would the rest of Westeros. And yet, with each victory, the satisfaction seemed to slip further from my grasp. Was this all there was? The thought lingered in the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside. There was no room for doubt. Not now. As the last of the Gardener soldiers fell before me, I turned my gaze toward the smoldering fields. Vhagar was circling above, her great wings casting a shadow over the devastation below. The fire had consumed everything, the crops, the soldiers, the very land itself. All that remained was ash. I mounted Vhagar once more, guiding her into the sky. Below, the flames still burned, but there was nothing left for them to devour. The Reach had been broken, its wealth turned to cinders. House Gardener would fall. Their lands would be ours. But as I looked out over the destruction, I could not shake the feeling that something had been lost in the flames. The Reach had been beautiful once. Prosperous. It had been full of life. And now, because of me, because of Vhagar, it was dead. This was the cost of conquest. I had always known that. I had accepted it long ago. But there was a part of me, a small, distant part, that wondered how much more would have to burn before we were done. How many more kingdoms would we have to reduce to ash before the world finally bowed to us? I shook my head. It did not matter. The Reach had fallen, and soon the rest of Westeros would follow. Onward, I commanded Vhagar, my voice firm, though the emptiness within me lingered. There are still more lands to claim. More thrones to burn. Vhagar roared in response, her great wings beating against the wind as we flew north, toward the next battlefield. Toward the next conquest. But even as we flew, I could not help but look back at the smoldering ruins of the Reach, at the flames that still flickered in the distance. And for the first time, I wondered if there was anything that could survive the wrath of a dragon. Or if, in the end, there would be nothing left at all. Chapter 4: the fall of the stags. The mountains of the Stormlands loomed ahead, jagged and unwelcoming, their peaks shrouded in mist and shadow. Beneath me, Vhagar stirred, sensing the tension in the air, her massive wings cutting through the cold wind as we flew toward the last stronghold of House Baratheon. Their forces had been scattered after Storm's End fell, but a stubborn few had taken refuge in the mountains, hoping to escape our wrath. Fools! There was no escape. The remnants of the Baratheon army had fled into these hills, thinking the terrain would protect them. They believed the cliffs and narrow passes could shield them from the fire of dragons. They were wrong. The mountains would not save them, and I would make sure of it. I had spent days hunting them, driving them deeper into the wilderness with every strike. The pursuit had become a game, a cruel dance of cat and mouse, and I found myself enjoying it more than I cared to admit. There was a certain satisfaction in hunting an enemy that refused to bend. Below, I could see the remnants of the Baratheon camp, scattered along the cliffs, their banners barely visible through the mist. There were so few of them left now. Broken. Defeated. And yet they still fought, still clung to their pride, their precious honor. I would crush it. Crush them. I pulled back on the reins, guiding Vhagar into a sharp descent. Her massive body cast a shadow over the cliffs, and I could hear the panic spreading through the camp below. The soldiers scrambled, shouting to one another, their fear palpable even from this height. They had grown accustomed to the protection of the mountains, but now they faced something far more dangerous. The roar of Vhagar's fire filled the air as she unleashed her flames upon the camp, reducing tents and men alike to ash. The heat rose in a wave, the force of the blast sending rocks and debris tumbling down the slopes. There would be no survivors this time. I circled above the chaos, watching as the flames consumed the last of the Baratheon forces. I could see them scattering, trying to flee into the narrow passes, but there was nowhere to run. The mountains that had once promised them safety had become their tomb. I descended once more, landing Vhagar on a wide plateau overlooking the camp. The ground shook beneath her weight, and I felt a surge of power rush through me. This was what it meant to be Targaryen, to stand above the world, to hold its very fate in my hands. I dismounted, Dark Sister in hand, and made my way through the smoldering wreckage. The stench of burnt flesh filled my nostrils, but I did not flinch. This was the price of rebellion. This was the fate of those who defied Aegon's will. As I walked through the camp, I could hear the groans of the dying, the pitiful cries of men who had been so proud only hours before. They were nothing now. Ashes. Ruins. And yet, there was something about this victory that felt hollow. Was this truly all there was? A sound behind me broke my thoughts. The rasp of steel against stone. I turned sharply, Dark Sister raised, and saw a lone figure emerging from the wreckage. A Baratheon soldier, his armor charred and blackened, his face twisted with hatred. He charged at me, sword raised, his eyes wild with desperation. "You will die for this," he screamed, his voice raw, broken. I met his charge without hesitation, parrying his blow with ease. His strength was failing, his movements sluggish, but his fury was still strong. I could see it in his eyes, the burning hatred of a man who had lost everything. A man with nothing left to lose. He swung at me again, but I sidestepped, bringing Dark Sister down in a swift arc. The blade cut through his armor as if it were paper, and he crumpled to the ground, his blood pooling at my feet. For a moment, I stood there, staring down at him, watching the light fade from his eyes. His defiance had been admirable, but it had been pointless. They were all doomed from the start. I sheathed Dark Sister and looked out over the battlefield, the smoke still rising from the ruins of the Baratheon camp. It was over. The stags had fallen. But as I stood there, surrounded by the destruction I had wrought, I felt a strange emptiness settle on my chest. What had I truly gained here? Another victory. Another rebellion crushed. But what had it cost me? My thoughts turned to Aegon, to the larger war that still raged across Westeros. We were winning, yes, but the cost was growing with every battle. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier with each victory. The Baratheons were broken. The Stormlands were ours. But as I mounted Vhagar once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost in the process. I soared into the sky, leaving the smoldering ruins behind me. The winds whipped through my hair, the cold biting at my skin, but I barely felt it. What was left for us once Westeros was conquered? The war had consumed us, shaped us into something darker, something crueler. But I did not regret it. This was the path we had chosen, and there was no turning back. The mountains of the Stormlands faded into the distance as we flew north, toward the next battle. The next conquest. But even as we flew, I could not shake the question that lingered in my mind. How many more would have to fall before we had one? As I neared our camp, nestled safely beyond the Stormlands, I saw the figure of Orys Baratheon waiting. He had not joined me in the final assault, having been tasked with rallying our forces for the next campaign. Orys had always been loyal to Aegon, and to us, his Targaryen kin. But I wondered, as I approached, how he felt about the slaughter of his bloodline. His face was hard, unreadable, as I landed Vhagar beside him. He offered no words of greeting, no acknowledgement of the victory I had just won. Instead, he merely nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon as though searching for something that was not there. I have dealt with the last of the Baratheon forces, I said, my voice betraying none of the doubt that gnawed at me. The Stormlands are ours. Orys turned to me, his expression still unreadable. The Stormlands may be yours, but you will not find joy in ruling a land of ashes. His words cut through the cold air like a knife. For a moment, I felt anger rise in me, sharp and hot, but I forced it down. Orys had lost much in this war, his family, his home. But he had chosen his loyalty, and he had chosen it well. Still, his words echoed in my mind, a whisper of the truth I had tried so hard to ignore. There is no joy in conquest, I said finally, my voice low. Only power. Orys did not respond, and I did not press him. There was nothing more to say. As night fell over the camp, I found myself standing alone, staring into the darkness. The fire of conquest still burned in me, but now it was tempered by something else. Something colder. The stags had fallen, but at what cost? Chapter 5, Shadows over King's Landing. The Red Keep was rising. Its skeletal frame, dark and imposing, stood against the sky, a monument to Targaryen power, a symbol of what we had achieved and what was still to come. I had designed the fortress with every detail in mind: high walls to intimidate, hidden passages to protect, and a throne room that would one day house the Iron Throne. A throne forged in the fires of our conquests, a throne that would remind the world of who ruled Westeros. And yet, as I stood atop the hill overlooking its construction, I felt none of the satisfaction I had expected. The sounds of hammers and chisels echoed around me, mingling with the wind that swept in from Blackwater Bay. Below, the laborers worked tirelessly, dragging stone, shaping the walls. It would be a fortress like no other, cold, impenetrable, a testament to Targaryen might. Aegon's might. But as I watched the keep take form, I could not shake the sense of unease that had been growing within me. Conquest had been simple. We had known our enemies, their faces, their armies. We had crushed them, burned them, brought them to their knees. But this was different. This was not war. This was rule. King's Landing had grown swiftly after our conquest. What had once been a small fishing village had turned into a sprawling city, a chaotic tangle of hastily built homes and shops, overcrowded streets, and lawless alleys. The people flocked to the capital, hoping to find security under Targaryen rule, but what they found instead was a city barely able to contain them. Aegon was not ready. I could see it in the way he carried himself, in the hesitation that flickered behind his eyes whenever he faced the lords who had bent the knee but still harbored rebellion in their hearts. They bowed, yes. But they did not yield. They would never fully yield, not until they feared us more than they feared losing everything. Rhaenys had tried to calm the unrest with kind words, with promises of prosperity and peace. But I knew better. Words were weak. Fear and power, those were the true weapons of a ruler. My gaze fell upon the unfinished Red Keep again. Its walls would stand for centuries, long after I was gone, long after our enemies were forgotten. But what good was stone without iron? Without fire? I turned away, my cloak whipping in the wind as I descended the hill, making my way toward the small council chamber where Aegon waited. The lords of Westeros had gathered today, summoned to discuss the governance of the new realm. It was a laughable notion, men who had fought us, who had bled trying to stop us, now sitting in council as if they were equals. As I approached the council chamber, I could already hear the murmurs inside. The lords were restless. They did not want to be here, forced to serve under a king they had been unable to defeat. But they would learn. I would make them. I entered the room without ceremony, my presence cutting through the low voices like a knife. The lords fell silent as I crossed the chamber, taking my place beside Aegon. He sat at the head of the table, his face calm, but I knew him well enough to sense the tension beneath his facade. The meeting was already underway. Lord Aaron of the Vale, his silver hair catching the light, was speaking in that measured, diplomatic tone of his, trying to make some point about trade routes and taxes. He spoke as if none of us had ever waged war, as if the blood of thousands had not been spilled to bring us to this table. I listened for a moment, my mind wandering as the droning continued. The lords had come to offer advice, to discuss matters of law and economy, but none of it mattered. These men did not understand power. They understood numbers, crops, and coin, but not power. Aegon nodded thoughtfully as Aaron finished speaking, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. The Vale is critical to our trade routes, he said, his voice steady. But we must also focus on securing the riverlands. House Tully has. They plot, I interrupted, my voice cutting through the chamber like steel. All eyes turned to me. Aegon's brow furrowed slightly, but he did not stop me. He knew better. The Tullys, the Arryns, the Lannisters, they plot against us even now, I continued, my gaze sweeping over the gathered lords. You think because they bend the knee, they are loyal? You are wrong. They bend only because they have no other choice. And the moment they see weakness, they will rise against us. Silence filled the chamber. The lords shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, but they knew the truth of my words. I could see it in their eyes, the fear. It was there, lurking just beneath the surface. Good. Let them be afraid. The Red Keep is not yet finished, I continued, my voice low but steady. But when it is, it will stand as a reminder to all who see it. A reminder of what happens to those who defy us. Fear is the only thing that will keep them in line. Not promises of wealth. Not trade routes or taxes. Fear. Lord Arryn, ever composed, leaned forward slightly, his cool gaze meeting mine. Fear alone cannot rule, Lady Visenya, he said calmly. Aegon's reign will be judged by the prosperity he brings to Westeros, not by the strength of his sword. Spoken like a man who has never known true war, I replied, my tone cold. You think peace is something that can be bargained for, that it can be maintained with words and promises. But peace is not won by kindness. It is won by blood. The tension in the room thickened, but I welcomed it. These men needed to understand. We were not their equals. We were not rulers by birthright or noble blood. We were rulers by conquest, by fire. Aegon, who had remained silent during my exchange with Arryn, finally spoke, his voice firm but not unkind. Visenya speaks the truth, though perhaps more harshly than necessary. We must show strength, but we must also offer the realm stability. Both are needed for peace. I said nothing, though I could feel the frustration rising within me. Stability. Peace. These were the words of a man who had never felt the sting of betrayal, who did not yet understand the nature of those we ruled. The meeting dragged on, the lords offering their opinions on matters that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. Aegon listened patiently, his calm demeanor never wavering, but I could see the weight pressing down on him. He was a king now, no longer just a conqueror. And he was beginning to understand the burden that came with that title. As the council finally adjourned, the lords filed out, their murmurs growing quieter as they left the chamber. Aegon remained seated, his gaze distant, lost in thought. You are too soft with them, I said once the room had emptied. They see it. They will use it against you. Aegon looked up at me, his expression tired but resolute. They are lords of Westeros, Visenya. We must rule them, not crush them. If we destroy them all, there will be no realm left to govern. Let them fear us, I replied. Fear is a far more effective tool than diplomacy. Aegon stood, crossing the room to stand beside me. For a moment, we looked out over King's Landing, the city sprawling beneath us, its streets alive with people, its future uncertain. I will rule this realm, Visenya, he said quietly. But not as a tyrant. Not through fear alone. I will unite Westeros not just by conquest, but by making it stronger, by giving its people something to believe in. I turned to face him, my expression hard. And if they do not believe? If they rise against you? He met my gaze, unflinching. Then we will remind them why dragons rule. For a moment, the tension between us lingered, unspoken but understood. We had always been different, Aegon and I. He sought unity, I sought domination. But in the end, we both wanted the same thing, power. I will see to the Red Keep's completion, I said finally, my voice steady. And when it is done, the world will know who rules Westeros. Aegon nodded, his gaze softening. I trust you, Visenya. I always have. But as I turned to leave, the weight of his words lingered in the air between us. Trust. It was a fragile thing, easily broken. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I wondered how long it would last. Chapter 6: The Crown of Ashes. The sun beat down mercilessly upon the sands of Dorne, the heat suffocating even from atop Vhagar's back. Below, the vast, arid desert stretched endlessly, dotted with sparse settlements and fortresses nestled in the rocky terrain. Dorne was unlike any of the lands I had conquered before. It was harsh, unforgiving, and unwilling to yield. As we flew over the mountains, the wind whipped against me, but even the cool air at this height could not erase the burning frustration building within. The Dornish had proven elusive, refusing to meet us in open battle, retreating into the safety of their deserts and mountains, where dragons could not reach them. They fought like ghosts, slipping through our grasp time and again. And I hated them for it. Every other kingdom had fallen before us, some with fire, others with blood, but all had knelt in the end. But Dorne? Dorne refused to bend. Even now, after months of relentless campaigns, raids, and dragonfire, they remained defiant. Their prince, Corin Martell, and his armies played a different game, one of evasion, of attrition, slowly wearing us down. They were not like the Reach or the Stormlands, where we could raise castles and crush armies. Dorne was a land of shadows and sand, and no amount of dragonfire could burn a desert. Vhagar rumbled beneath me, sensing my rising anger. She was as frustrated as I was. There were no great cities to destroy, no proud armies to obliterate. The Dornish did not fight like men, they fought like whispers in the wind, striking from the shadows before disappearing into the dunes. How do you conquer something that refuses to be caught? The thought gnawed at me as I descended toward the camp where Aegon and Rhaenys waited. Our forces had been reduced to small raiding parties, chasing shadows across the Red Mountains, each raid feeling more futile than the last. Aegon's strategy had always been to unite through overwhelming force, but here, in this forsaken land, force meant nothing. As I landed, Aegon approached, his face grim but determined. He wore the crown now, the Iron Crown of Westeros, but I could see the weight of it pressing down on him. Dorne was the last piece of his vision, the one kingdom that refused to join the others under our rule. It was a thorn in his side, a constant reminder that his conquest was not yet complete. "They slip away again?" he asked, though the answer was clear in my silence. "They flee into the sands," I replied, dismounting Vhagar. They fight like cowards. Aegon's expression hardened. Corin Martell knows he cannot defeat us in battle, so he chooses to bleed us dry, bit by bit. Rhaenys joined us then, her usual warmth tempered by frustration. She had been leading many of the raids with mere axes, but even she had grown weary of chasing ghosts. We burn their villages, but it's as if the desert swallows them whole, she said, shaking her head. They do not fight for land or power. They fight for survival. And that makes them dangerous. They should be afraid of us, I said sharply, my voice cold. They should know what it means to defy a Targaryen. Rhaenys met my gaze, her eyes steady. Fear does not break men like the Dornish, Visenya. They are different from the lords of the Reach or the Riverlands. They do not care for crowns or castles. They care for their freedom. Freedom. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. What was freedom to these people but a delusion? The world belonged to the strong, to those who could wield power and enforce their will. That was what it meant to be a Targaryen. And yet, in Dorne, we had no power. Our dragons burned their villages, yes, but the Dornish were like the desert itself, resilient, shifting, impossible to pin down. Aegon paced, his frustration growing. We cannot afford to be drawn into a war of attrition, not here, he said, glancing toward the horizon. Winter is coming, and we cannot sustain a prolonged campaign in this land. Winter. Another enemy on the horizon, one that even dragons could not fight. We should burn Sunspear, I said, my voice hard. Bring fire and blood to the heart of Dorne and force them to surrender. Aegon frowned, shaking his head. Sunspear is fortified, and its people are hidden. A direct attack would only waste lives and resources. The Dornish know how to outlast us. For a moment, I felt the urge to argue, to demand that we bring all the might of our dragons against Dorne's capital and burn it to the ground. But I knew Aegon was right. The Dornish were not like the lords of the other kingdoms. They had nothing to lose, and that made them dangerous. They fought with patience, not pride. Still, the thought of retreat gnawed at me. The idea of leaving this land unconquered, of allowing the Dornish to slip through our grasp, was unbearable. What would you have us do, then? I asked, my voice quiet but laced with frustration. Aegon's gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the sun was setting over the endless dunes. We negotiate, he said finally. If we cannot conquer them by force, we must find another way. We offer terms. Let Dorne remain independent in exchange for peace. Rhaenys nodded slowly, though I could see the reluctance in her eyes as well. It may be the only way to avoid losing more than we gain. Negotiate. The very word felt like defeat to me. The Targaryens did not negotiate. We conquered. We ruled. And yet, perhaps Aegon was right. Perhaps this war was one we could not win in the way we had won the others. But that did not mean I would accept it easily. As night fell over the camp, I found myself alone, standing at the edge of the dunes, staring out at the endless sands. The wind blew, carrying with it the faint scent of the desert, a reminder that this land would never truly belong to us. Vhagar stirred nearby, her massive form blending into the darkness. I could feel her frustration as well, the need for battle, for victory. We had always been the strongest, the fiercest. But here, in Dorne, that strength meant nothing. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the crown pressing down on me, not the physical crown, but the weight of conquest, of expectation. We had united 6 kingdoms. We had bent the knee of every great house, from the north to the Stormlands. And yet, Dorne remained unconquered, a reminder that our power was not absolute. For the first time, I wondered if Aegon's dream of a united Westeros was an illusion. If even dragons could not conquer Dorne, what hope was there for true peace? For unity? Perhaps, in the end, there was no peace. No true victory. Only war, stretching endlessly before us, as new enemies rose from the ashes of the old. As the stars appeared in the sky, I felt a strange sense of resignation settle over me. The war in Dorne would end, one way or another. Perhaps with blood, perhaps with peace. But even if we won, if Dorne bent the knee, there would always be another battle, another war. The cycle would never end. I had thought that once we conquered Westeros, we would find peace. But now, I saw the truth. The Iron Throne was not the end, it was only the beginning. The crown of Westeros was a crown of ashes. If you enjoyed Visenya's journey through fire and blood, there's much more to come. In the next episode, we'll delve deeper into her darkest battles and the secrets that threaten to tear the Targaryen legacy apart. Will Visenya's ambition conquer all, or will it consume her? Don't miss out, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell right below to stay updated on all our latest tales of dragons, power, and the rise of House Targaryen. Your support helps keep the fire burning for more epic adventures.